Alrighty. I am already transitioning back over. Hello, lads, lasses, and NB badasses. Politics again. Yes, all my streams are political streams anyway, but this time it's actually explicitly, that's what we're doing. That's what we're mainly doing. We're doing politics. So if you are here, welcome on in, and there is the reading of what we're going to read. So oh man, I forgot to add that to the title too. I have the Learn With Me communion. Oh, that's what I do. Okay, I'm gonna quickly update the stream title right now. So at least as people are coming in, they'll know that's what I forgot to do. Reading stream. I used to say reading stream in the title of these things, with the exclamation point reading, so that people know that the reading a command, so they can do exclamation point reading to find out what's this we're reading here. And there we go. There's the link to the page. We're reading The Shock and Victory by David Graeber. I did misspell it in the thing. The success of the world untied. Oh, I didn't see that typo. I'm going to go in there right now and fix it. Everything else should be fine. Alright, now how do this see? Okay, I got that correct on the OBS as well. Alrighty then. But if you want to help retweet the stream to get more people to be able to see it, join the conversation, as it were. There you go. There's a retweet command, as it were. So all the retweet commands for the things should be updated each and every time, and so we can do that. And I think everything is already good. So the closed caption should be on too. Just want to make sure that that's the case. Yeah, and everything is good. Yep, they are. Okay, yeah, exactly. Ghost caption is on, and so yeah, let's read it now. Yes, I am going to get back to reading Direct Action Iconography by Dave Graeber. Most of the videos, only two of the videos I need to put up. Most of them are up on my YouTube channel. Oh yeah, so there's a link to just my YouTube channel, which also in there in the socials. So you can find a lot of my political readings up there on my YouTube channel. I should really get back to upload them, preparing them, and making sure that they can easily just go up there, so that way all I have to do is just click upload in order to do that. I'm just lazy at doing that. I'm lazy at just clicking the unlist and public, as it were. I don't know what I'm worried about. Anyway, so this, as I mentioned in my tweet, is that I was listening to the daily podcast of It Could Happen Here. It Can Happen Here was the miniseries that Robert Evans, the podcast miniseries that Robert Evans did in 2019. It's just one-off miniseries, is where kind of his behind the police and behind the insurrectionists and the women's war and Portland uprising. Oh, there's different podcast projects that Robert Evans did. But now It Could Happen Here is a daily podcast, and so earlier this week, for It Could Happen Here, Robert Evans interviewed his team on the daily It Could Happen Here podcast, interviewed St. Andrews, who's so it's a really excellent YouTube channel and a YouTube educator that I should really watch his videos on to really learn more about this sort of stuff. And someone in that podcast, someone mentioned about this essay, "The Shock, the Victory," David Graeber. Kind of it's okay after the revolution, or after things are successful, what happens now? And someone mentioned that this one is really good to read. I believe it's this essay, but either way, I do enjoy a lot of David Graeber's writing. Anyway, and so this should be quite interesting read. So, "Shock to Victory" by David Graeber. Retrieve from May 16th from newsinfoshop.org. It's also published in the Rolling Thunder, a anarchist journal of dangerous living. And number 5 by Climb Inc. and the X Collective of Working. So David Graeber, Shock to Victory. Beginning reading is the biggest problems facing direct action movements is that we don't know how to handle victory. This might seem an odd thing to say because a lot of us haven't been feeling particularly victorious of late. Most anarchists today feel the global justice movement was kind of a blip, inspiring certainly while it lasted, but not a moment that succeeded either in putting down lasting organizational roots or transforming the contours of the power in the world. The anti-war movement was even more frustrating, since anarchists and anarchist tactics were largely marginalized. The war will end, of course, but that's just because wars always do. No one's feeling that they contribute much to it. Briefly, I want to pause right here because I should mention the date of this essay too, 2007, to add to the important context of it. Because it's like, yeah, there was at the time at like 1990 and like in the early 2000s, right around that time, basically like after the WTO riots, as were, that there was a anti-globalization kind of like sort of thing that was happening. It was like a big swear. I mean, the anarchists like and the activists preventing the WTO talks from continuing on because of like massive amounts of protests outside of Seattle, where I'm from, or the area where I live near. That was actually kind of like a victory, as it were. Now the anti-war movement in Iraq, yeah, that was not like successful at all because mostly people that were organizing those events were wanting to do it like peacefully, and many people kind of like criticize the peaceful tactics of the non-violent tactics and those sort of things. Peter Gadelos even points out that like in how non-violence protects the state is that like because of the peaceful non-violence, specifically tactics of the anti-war movements of war. Now, granted, there are definitely times and places, and there's for non-violent diversity of tactics of sort of things too. But as pointed out in David Graeber's like direct action iconography, that there would be some people that would go to those meetings for direct action network in New York and be like, would say diversity of tactics, want to talk about diversity of tactics, and what they mean is they want to marginalize non-violent, any violent tactics, as were. They are for diversity of tactics as long as like all the tactics that they're being diverse with is non-violent ones, essentially. So that's an important thing that I want to like mention and bring up as about the time that this was written, as it is like important context to know about like this sort of thing, as well as like anytime like you read anything by anarchists as well, like the pro-government anarchist essay that I read from Elker about Tesla. That was a critique against other anarchists, even like Kropotkin, if I remember from that essay, about anarchists that were pro-state, pro-government, were because of World War One. It was just kind of like they had to. Well, listen. The important thing right now is like us ending World War One, and we have to align with the states in order to do that. And Erica Matt Tesla is like, yeah, right. Okay, you can do that. You can try to do that. But is that going to help you? Is that going to help you? Is that going to help our cause? Anything like that? So that was a critique of like those kind of anarchists were. So I'm going to continue on with the rest of the essay starting here. I want to suggest an alternative interpretation. Let me add three initial propositions here. 1. Odd though it may seem, the ruling class lives in fear of us. They appear to still be haunted by the possibilities that if average Americans really get wind of what they're up to, they might all end up hanging from trees. It knows it seems implausible, but still hard to come up with any other explanation for the way they go into like panic mode the moment there's just any sign of mass mobilization, especially mass direct action. And usually they try to like distract attention by starting some kind of war. I'm gonna stop here and mention how it's like I think the state kind of like did realize that, as it were, in the 2020 summer uprisings in response to the lynching of George Floyd. There you saw the police state itself, as it were, really crack down violently against other people. I think I'm going to like add a content warning to my stream about like talks of violence. Talks of violence, police, and state. I'll mention talks of police and state violence. That'll be a good one to like go with. and transition's over, so now I can see this content warnings. Where was I? Okay, so because I think during the uprising in response to George Floyd killing, that was like the police state of the sort of police state, which is the kind of this part of the state is where that were reacting to the kind of as like David Graeber points out, any kind of like semblance of a mass movement, as it were, the police cracked down heavily with like kindling, use of tear gas and crackdowns and all those sort of things, and just like viciously arresting protesters, as it were. Portland kind of like it did the thing too, or it seems like almost every night there were people that are dedicated to like going out to like Portland and going out to just the Justice Center and to find all kinds of things. I do have a friend, JBJ, who lives in Portland, and they can definitely tell you it's like, or maybe Robin Evans also, who also lives in Portland, mentions this too on one of his podcasts too. But it's kind of like the town of Portland. It's not the whole town of Portland was like under like a massive violence also, because of the demonstrations and the police cracking down on those demonstrations. No, it was just around the Justice Center. If it's only, you would only notice the uprising and the stuff happening with you go 2 blocks next to the Justice Center. That's where it's like all the action and happened. And again, the police just like cracked down viciously on it, as it were, because like just because like of one woman like touching like plywood, that the things would come up. That was enough for the police to respond and crack down heavily on like the person that touched the fence, as it were, of the Justice Center that they erected quite violently. But if you go outside of those areas, anywhere else in the city, outside the Justice Center or something like it, it'll look like Portland is just as normal as it is, just very peaceful, as it were. And so, and I think also I've like read, granted I read this off of like Facebook, that someone mentions that we're, hello King Bob, welcome and thank you for tuning in. If you the !port reading, so you can like read along with me, but I got off of the Anarchist Library, is the Shot Victory by David Graeber, because I love David Graeber's like stuff a lot, and so I'm just like reading in this thing as well as like going off on tangents on my own. I think mentioning, there's actually some people of the political class right now that actually kind of are afraid, as it were. So this is an essay from 2007, but still some of those like fears of like the workers all rising up to like guillotine them, still true. I mean, hell, the guillotines like showed up in like Detroit during the uprisings in the summer 2020. Guillotine showed up, appeared outside of outside of like Jeff Bezos' home, my feudal lord, because they lived in the Seattle area, and Jeff Bezos, or the Lex Luthor, is my feudal lord, and also in Guatemala last year, the Guatemalan Congress just really still for the poor is that the reallocated funds, they defunded the food stamps program for Guatemala, as it were, what little food that was given there, and they were going to reallocate those funds into like the executive or the congressional like lunch program or something like that, or subsidies or vouchers, as it were. Basically, they were taking the money for food from the poor and giving it to themselves. The Guatemalans did not react kindly to that they made a functioning guillotine outside of the Congress building. They also burned it down. That was mentioned in Moma Effigy's like essay that I read of if I would to like feed all the hungry, I would burn the world down. This work. I don't have a Discord server. Unfortunately, right now, no, I don't have a Discord server. I do have a Twitter, so you can like chat with me there. But yeah, I'm saying I'd like it'd be cool to have a Discord server. Probably should eventually like get around to like to doing that sort of thing. Yeah, but no, I usually just like do discussions like here on Twitch whenever I feel like it. Most of my gaming streams are also AMAs, so you can ask me anything on my gaming streams, as it were. For the political streams, though, like if there is going to be like conversation and discussion, keep it at least to relative to the topic, as it were. And hello, Sunday mornings. This one is a good one. As this it lends itself to a lot of discussions because it's Shock to Victory, talks about direct action, the anti-globalization movement, and the early 2000s, the anti-war movement in the 2003. So let's continue on, actually, and continue on with the essay. And number 2, in the way this panic is justified, mass direct action, especially when organized on democratic lines, is incredibly effective. Over the last 30 years in America, there has been only 2 instances of mass action of this sort: the anti-nuclear movement in the late 70s and the so-called anti-globalization movement from roughly 1999 to 2001. In each case, the moment excuse me. In each case, the moment main political goals were reached far more quickly than anyone involved imagined possible. 3. The real problem such movements face is that they're always getting taken by surprise by the speed of their initial success. We never prepared for victory. It throws us into confusion. We start fighting with each other. The rationing of repression and appeals to nationalism that inadvertently accompanies some new round of war mobilization, then placed into the hands of the authoritarians on every side of the political spectrum. As a result, by the time the full impact of our initial victories become clear, we're usually too busy feeling like failures to even notice. Let's take the 2 most prominent examples case by case. Okay, so Sunday mornings you say, I'm here because I do not have the same views as you and I need to have an open mind. And that's an interesting question to ask. King Bob asks this Sunday morning, said, what is your thoughts on the suppression of the flat earth theory? I haven't heard much about that in the topic. Flat earth is just a conspiracy theory, as it were. So, King Bob, if you really... now, I'm curious about what's your position of flat earth, as it were. And also, if you go down the rabbit hole of flat earth theory, you find Nazis. Because that's not like every conspiracy theory, just when you go down the rabbit hole, you find Nazis and anti-Semitism and end of it. No, it kind of starts there. In the case of the flat earth, it actually kind of starts there. Then as crazy as it is of Indiana Jones, the Indiana Jones did not make up the fact that the Nazis were searching for a cult and some other kind of spiritual things. They would have actually looked for the Holocaust. They wouldn't actually look for the Ark Covenant. They wouldn't actually look for a lot of these different things. That one was not stretch. The stretch is, of course, that archaeology is all about finding Nazis, which I'm not opposed to fighting Nazis, as it were. And don't forget to check my rules, as it were. The fascism is banned on outright, and I do include Trumpism as fascism. Between flat Earth and the Nazis and extremist population. Okay, so I did bring it up, so I will answer this question. And afterwards I will keep the conversation discussion to the topic of him shock of victory, direct action, and that sort of thing, and so on. But the Nazi scientists were trying to find other things, as it were. They trying to actually I read this in the book Big Business and Fascism, that the Nazis, I think as well as Mussolini fascism, they'd actually tried to use mysticism to try to recruit the white worker class, the good gentiles, as it were, the non-Jewish people, all the people part of their master race sort of thing, as it were. So that's where it is. That's where it started from. So I can go off and talk about how terrible the Nazis are, and where the Nazis learned about from their genocide program. They learned that from the United States genocide programs of indigenous people, but that is a separate topic, and it's not connected, not directly connected to this one, the shock to victory, as it were. So let's keep the discussion kind of a bit focused on more on the shock to victory. We can have that discussion. We can have that discussion definitely afterwards, after I start playing a game of some kind. Because when I'm playing the game, I don't have mind having any sort of discussion, as it were. So we'll talk. As we're back to the essay, kind of some of the few mass movements actually surprisingly got victories, and David Graeber is going to talk about that. Back to the essay, talking about one, the anti-nuclear movement. The anti-nuclear movement of the late 70s marked the first appearance in North America of what we now consider anarchist tactics and formed organizations, mass actions, affinity networks, spokes councils, consensus process, jail solidarity, the very principle of decentralized direct democracy. was all somewhat primitive compared to now. Were significant differences, notably a much stricter Gagarin-style conception of nonviolence. Gandhian style, I see. There's a Sunday morning asked King Bob what's the thoughts on political compass. Just going to add my thoughts here on the political compass. I'm far into the green square of libertarian and like socialism. But that political compass has like some problematic things. I think I should retake that political compass text honestly on my Twitch stream and see how far off I come. Because I have like did it on my YouTube channel as well like years ago, and there were some very tricky questions for me as an anarchist to answer. But I think I should also take the 8 values to test too. I think I want to take it again and then try to see where those questions are. King Bob, you're a narco-capitalist. I'll say this much, King Bob. Anarcho-capitalists are just big babies that don't want to pay taxes. I call them ANCRAPs because in order to have capitalism, you need to have a state because the state upholds capitalism. But then now we'll get be a bit of distraction from the discussion at hand. So we'll start talking about that once I'm playing something else after we read this essay. So back to the essay, it was somewhat old primitive compared to now. There were significant differences, notably a much stricter Gandhian style of conception of non-violence. I want to mention here about Gandhi. Screw Gandhi. Gandhi was did some terrible things. He wanted to prove his piety or his celibacy by sleeping naked to 16-year-olds or something like that. Sunday morning, you got the test of authoritarian rights. Well, before King Bob, the political compass test doesn't have alt-right, but being the authoritarian right wing, yeah, it's interesting that you two couldn't join this political chat as I am an anarcho-syndicalist. But at least one of you did say that you have very different ideas about my views but you want to have an open mind. Okay. But Gandhi's a piece of shit. So back to the essay. But all elements that were there and was the first time they had together as a package. For 2 years, the movement grew with amazing speed and showed every sign of becoming a national-wide movement. Then, almost as quickly, it disintegrated. It all began when, in 1974, when some veterans, peaceniks, turned organic farmers in New England successfully blocked construction of a proposed nuclear plant in Mungo, Massachusetts. In 1976, they joined with other New England activists inspired by the success of a year-long plank occupation in Germany to create the Clamshell Alliance. Clamshell's immediate goal was to stop construction of a proposed nuclear plant in Sephirajo, New Hampshire. While the alliance never ended up managing an occupation so much as a series of dramatic mass arrests, combined with jail solidarity, their actions involving at peak 10,000 of people organized on directly democratic lines, succeeded in throwing the very idea of nuclear power into question in a way it had never been before. Similar coalitions began springing up across the country. The Parliament alliances in South Carolina, Oyster Shell in Maryland, and Sunflower in Kansas, and most of all famous, the Albion Alliance in California, reacted originally to a complete insane plan to build a nuclear plant at the Diablo Canyon, almost directly on top of a major geological fault line. Okay, I have my problems when even anarchist writers that I like a lot, like David Graeber, use the words insane, it's a bit ableist there, but why build a nuclear power plant on a geological fault line? Fuck pray. Yeah, okay, I know that you were responding to, and yes, King J, this is live. Hello, King J, welcome on in. is because fuck PragerU. PragerU is just propaganda. I understand that you were responding to King Bob about the eye waking thing, but PragerU is terrible. PragerU is just straight up propaganda. They don't have any facts. They know they don't have any facts. Is within in the video, it argues well against all my ideas. PragerU just spouts out a lot of bullshit all at once. It's all because like Dennis Prager is a propagandist and like a neocon, and also like got a whole bunch of like money from oil companies, all of which they want to like keep the. What's it mean by male plus? Let's see. Do I have my gender as a comedian as it were? This also this is also King KJ. Remind all those in chat, and yeah, I'm bad at this too. I got myself distracted by like that sort of thing too. But there you go. This is the whole point of like these Learn Repeat streams, is that like we're not debating in here. This is Sunday morning. I'm just gonna ban you. You cited Trump TV. If you were watch Trump TV, I'm going to count you as a Trumper, and then just going to like straight up ban you. Let's see. I'm going to check my commands to see if in fact I am have a gender command, so I can quickly. What's up with Trump TV? Trump just like wants to have like his own sources, as it were. Trump always just wanted to have like his own like TVs. Or I don't think I have. Let's see. I kind of have it as pronouns. Okay. So to KJ to about male plus sort of thing. I'm genderqueer. I'm demi non-binary. They, he, my pronouns. There are times where I do feel like a man, but there are times when I don't feel like a man. That's kind of like the man plus sort of thing. Is like my gender is where it's like, love the delicious like a steak dinner of like man gender. Love that. Love the steak dinner. Ooh, but here's this extra side dish of non-binary gender or genderqueer gender. Ooh, and some like hash browns of genderqueer gender. So that's where the plus comes in. I need more gender. I can't. My personality is not cannot be boxed in by like just like the cis man and kind of like the gender as well. So that's kind of like the more of the plus thing. And sometimes I don't feel like a man, and so I'm just that plus thing, and I don't know whatever the plus gender is as well. So that's why I go with like genderqueer and demi non-binary. So basically, I'm non-binary. It's like. Yeah, times I'm a man, but I'm not cis. That's the whole thing. Okay, and so yeah, I don't have a gender command too. I gotta work on that. I'm just gonna ban you, King Bob. Yep, well, it's like right there. What's this mean? Male plus, and it's honestly, King J, for me, male plus and non-binary, it's kind of both. That's just my gender, as it were, and it's like different for like each people, as it were, for non-binary, as it were. I just like feel like it's. I feel like it's like there are times when man, but I definitely don't feel confined to like. It feels like I've been boxed in when if I think of myself as like a cis man. But anyway, there's enough distractions there. I knew when I streamed in the politics category, I'm going to get right wingers in here into like wanting to discuss things as it were. Now, King Bob and Sunday Morning, you are still here. You can still watch. Just like. Sunday Morning kind of like that, like and King Bob, you say that like my politics are cringe. Yeah, that's just like that's a good way to just get like banned, as it were. And leftists don't have a hive mind. I can prove that because like it is actually a true stereotype that leftists like spend a lot of time arguing with each other. Now, even amongst anarchists, we don't all agree. I might have like my issues in here with that David Graeber, as it were. Yeah, honestly, there's so many. There's like Marxist-Leninist Maoist, Marxist-Leninist, Marxist, tankies, or no, actually have stolen this, I should say, or like left this to deny genocide. And then anarchists, anarcho-syndicalists, anarcho-communists, libertarian-socialists were, even amongst anarchists, there can be like divisions as where I don't get along with permanent anarchists. Well, again, King Bob saying the anarcho-capitalists, and so, but narco-capitalists are not real anarchists. But anyway, so back to the essay, as we learned about the success of the anti-nuclear movement. Back to the essay. Clamshell's first three mass actions in 1976 and 1977 were probably successful, but it soon fell into a crisis over questions of the democratic process. In May 1978, a newly created coordinating committee violated the process to accept a last-minute government offer for a 3-day legal rally at Seebach instead of like a planned fourth occupation. The excuse was reluctant to alienate the surrounding community. Criminals. Okay, no. David Graeber uses a lot of like words they don't know how to like pronounce. So I'm gonna look this up and see how to pronounce it. Hopefully Google can like do it for me.
Acrimonious.
Typical of speech or made anger or bitter. Acrimonious. Okay, angry and bitter. Acrimonious. Okay, so back to the essay. Acrimonious debate began about consensus of community relations, which then explains to the role of nonviolence, even cutting through fences and defense measures like gas masks, and had originally been forbidden, gender bias, and so on. By 1979, the alliance split into two contending and increasingly ineffective factions, and after many delays, the Seebach plant, or half of it anyway, did go into occupation. The Albion alliance lasted longer, until 1985, in part because it's like strong core anarcho-feminists, but in the end, Diablo Canyon too got its license and went into operations in like December 1988. On the surface, this doesn't sound too inspiring, but what was the moment they really achieved? It might helpful here to map out its full range of goals. Short-term goals: to block construction of a particular nuclear plant in question, Seebach, Diablo Canyon, and midterm goals: to block construction of all new nuclear plants, delegitimize the very idea of nuclear power, and begin moving towards conservation and green power and legitimate new forms of nonviolent resistance and feminist-inspired direct democracy. Long-term goals, at least for the more radical elements: smash the state and destroy capitalism. So at least they kind of had like some not commentary here. So at least they had like a few steps there. So it wasn't just like collect out of pants, stage 2, stage 3 profits. So stage 1, block construction of the nuclear power plant. Stage 2, stage 3, smash the state and destroy capitalism. But also I agree with the goals, definitely smash the state and destroy capitalism. So King J is asking me, are you against colonialism? Yes, I am against colonialism. Land back. I'm on the Dubon Wash's land. I actually researched the indigenous people whose land I am on right now. And that's quite an interesting story. I probably should actually do a whole stream on that as well, or like reading the history of the Dubon Wash and getting some like articles together so I can read on stream, because it is like quite fascinating as it were. Terrible though, because like white people again doing horrible things as it were. As always, again, white people. And that's one thing I also want to just ban whiteness as just as not a thing as at all, but ban the concept of whiteness as well, because like it kind of like it starts some like terrible things. Anyway, continue on with the essay. If so, the results are clear. Short-term goals were almost never reached. Despite numerous tactical victories, delays, utility companies' bankruptcies, legal injunctions, the plant that become the focus of like mass actions all ultimately went online. Governments simply cannot allow themselves to be seen to lose in such a battle. Long-term goals were also obviously not obtained. But one reason they weren't is that the medium-term goals were all reached almost immediately. The action did not legitimize the very idea of nuclear power, raising public awareness to the point in that when the 3 Mile Island meltdown in 1979, it doomed the industry forever. While plans for Seabach and Diablo Canyon might not have been cancelled, just about like every other then pending plan to build a nuclear reactor was, and no new ones have been proposed for a quarter century. There was indeed a more towards conservation and green power and legitimizing new democratic organization techniques. All of this happened much more quickly than anyone really anticipated. I got another question from King J in the chat. How do you want to defeat states without colonialism and thus exerting influence aboard? Nanishka? I'm confused by the premise of the question, honestly. You're saying that like the only way to defeat states is with colonialism? But I don't want, and also it's like, I don't want to exert influence across the board anyway. I just hope that like a more comrades would see that life would be better without state. But honestly, by doing land back, as it were, I should reread the history of the Jazzbatistas, as it were. They don't call themselves anarchists. They kind of act anarchistically, though. And it's fine if they don't want to call themselves anarchists. They're the Zapatistas. But like that is kind of a land back sort of thing, where it's like they really just like stopped the Mexico government and impose their own rule and they'll create their own autonomy. That's the way I want to do that. Which, yeah, is kind of like being anti-colonialist in a way as well, because the Mexican government's like, well, the Mexico did have its own independence, that's a word, but the Mexico was also imperialized heavily because of Spain and Portugal all throughout Latin America. America hasn't helped like things after the fact, though. Not sure about particularly of Mexico because America did not directly get involved. King J.S. and Captain, you think anarchist can compete against like modern centralized states such as like USSA as China? You know, this is something that actually David Graeber like kind of said in the 2006 interview in Charlie Rose. And this was written in 2007, so it's kind of around the time. It's that like, in the 20th century, it seemed like anarchist ideas it won't take any root whatsoever. It seems like it's not have no chances to succeed whatsoever, because in the 20th century was one of the most violent centuries ever known, with because if we're not fighting actual world wars, we were preparing for a world war. Anarchists are not good at like building giant mechanized killing machines, and I think that's to our credit. But the thing is, like, anarchist societies like right now, if the states, those centralized states want to, especially like China actually beats the United States in military, even though like the United States like outspends like the 26 of the next countries as it were, and 25 of them being our allies on military, because of American hegemony as it were. So yes, but even within the states, as it were, I read an article about like a charity that raised homes for like homeless people, house homeless people, as it were, and the state came in and crushed those things just because the garbage was piling up. But King J, I'm gonna like type again. Learn with me. Let's have the conversation be focused on the topic at hand, the shock of victory, as it were. It was kind of connected because we're talking about anarchist ways. But King J, this is not your debate space. We're not here to debate. This is not a debate bro space. We're here to learn together about the shock to victory as written by David Graeber, and I think it's actually quite interesting to like for anarchists and activists and like radicals to like know about of like we need to learn from mistakes and learn how to be able to do well with victories of the story even when we're not expecting it. So back to the essay. In retrospect, it's easy to see in the most subsequent problems emerged directly from the very speed of the movement's success. Radicals had hoped to make links between the nuclear industry and the very nature of capitalist system that created it. As it turns out, the capitalist system proved more than willing to jettison the nuclear industry the moment it became a liability. Once giant utility companies began claiming that they wanted to promote a green energy, effectively inviting what we now call the NGO types to the space at the table, there was an enormous temptation to jump ship. Just for anyone that don't know about the term NGO, the acronym, it's like non-government organizations. So like charities, that's the things. So like Planned Parenthood, NGOs, so like that. Greenpeace, Greenpeace will be an NGO. Definitely, anarchists have critiques about the NGOs, kind of sort of thing. Okay, yeah, this is where I last continue on. Especially because many of them only ally with more radical groups as so to win themselves a place at the table to begin with. Yeah, and this it's also it comes up in David Graeber's Direct Action Necronographer too, where it's for Direct Action Network New York, they would sometimes get the SOC Dem types, the Dem SOC types, like members of Democratic Socialist America or other kind of more liberal NGOs would come into meetings, and they often kind of usually decry the radical aspects of these kind of movements as well. Again, like I said earlier about how there will be the liberals or the SOC Dems and Dem SOCs that would talk about diversity tactics in only so much as to denounce the violent tactics that the more radical ones like Black Bloc would advocate for. They want to they'll cry, we must talk about the diversity tactics, or diversity tactics, in that they don't want violent tactics happening at protests. They want peaceful, non-violent protests as much as possible. Even though, as we've kind of shown, what's been seen in the uprising, the 2020 uprising, I mentioned before, in the summer of 2020, is that even if you're non-violent, the state will fucking crack down on you if they want to, just to exert their dominance and the power, because that uprising was a challenge to their legitimacy, and so they fight back hard, or to effectively say, here, this is my legitimacy. So anyway, continuing on. The inevitable result was a series of heated strategic debates. But it's impossible to understand this without first understanding the strategic debates within directly democratic movements are largely conducted as such. They almost take the form of debates about something else. Take for instance the question of capitalism. I gotta take a drink right now because my throat is harsh. I got more right here. Eating a whole pizza also didn't help because cheese is not good for the throat. Anyway, continuing on the essay. Anti-capitalists are usually more than happy to discuss their positions on the subject. Liberals, on the other hand, really don't like to have to say, they don't like to say, actually, I'm in favor of maintaining capitalism. Pause right here. Oh my God, I feel this so much. Because I am one of those, yes, I am very much one of those anti-capitalists that are happy to have these kind of debates with people. This is why I kind of I do purposely kind of enter into liberal spaces. Well, I'm surrounded by liberals anyway. This is why I kind of want to have these political discussions, as we're, in generally speaking, when many people do not want to have these political discussions. And I have figured that, they just don't want to have the political discussions, as it were, because they don't want to just say outright, actually, I'm in favor of maintaining capitalism. There are some liberals that do want to say that. They'll just say, I don't think capitalism needs to be dismantled, it just needs to be modified. And so, oh my God, it is kind of frustrating to me. And yeah, the liberals don't want to outright say that. Some do though, but they don't want to outright say that because they know that in the eyes of the radicals, the anti-capitalists, I'm vehemently anti-capitalist too, they will seem like the bad guy. They don't want to feel like the bad guy. They just don't want to feel the bad guy. So to avoid feeling like the bad guy, they avoid the debates. They like to talk about, I don't know, reform and all these other things. Oh my god. So continuing on with the essay. So whenever possible, they try to change the subject. Yes, I knew it. They hate to debate that. Yes. Oh, I so feel this. Continuing on. So debates that are actually about whether to directly challenge capitalism usually end up getting argued out as if they were short-term debates about tactics and non-violence. Oh, and liberals will always often. Even some counter-rights, even some anarchists do actually advocate for non-violence and talk against violence. It seems like to me that they want to be more against violence more. They want to I wonder honestly, as it were, if I'm going to do violence tactics, will they prevent me from doing violence tactics? And I think actually some WTO rights in Seattle, definitely some of the people who were doing black bloc kind of felt like that the liberals did not want them to do violence and tactics, as it were. There's questions about how effective the violent taxes were, and unfortunately there is a stereotype that some anarchists still have, because sometimes the only practice that anarchists do is breaking windows, as it were. But the anarchists still kind of has this image of an anarchist and a revolutionist that they have to shake off. Of no, the anarchists and revolutionists are not just about breaking windows or using freedom potions, as it were. It is unfortunately. It's something that we'll have to shake off, and sometimes we're not the best at doing that. But then again, at the same time, if anarchists would just do a lot of food not bombs and just feed the homeless, as it were, that doesn't get as much attention as throwing a brick to a Starbucks window. It doesn't. So even when we do the right things, do the non-violent things, do practice of feeding the poor, it doesn't get as much attention. And so the image of anarchists just being brick throwing revolutionists that love violence doesn't go away. It's just difficult for us to win, honestly. But continuing on, authoritarian socialists or others who are suspicious of democracy itself don't like to make that a issue either, and prefer to discuss the need to create the broadest possible coalition. Oh my god! Oh, yes! Authoritarian socialists, as in Marxists, it's not Marxists, not all Marxists. There are some narco-Marxists, honestly. There are some anarchists that are also Marxists. But Marxist-Leninists, for sure. Marxist-Leninist Maoists, Trotskyists, kind of any socialists or communists that are not in favor of anarchism, or thinks that people are shit, so anarchism won't work. Liberals kind of gets into things, but it's definitely authoritarian socialists, especially the ones that some of them which deny genocide. I hate those socialists. I hate those leftists. But they are sometimes the first to say left unity, especially the Stalinists or the Stalin apologists, who say Stalin did nothing wrong. When you criticize them for being anti-sex work, because sex work is work, and if you are anti-sex work, that's a bigotry. They'll be the first ones oh, we need left unity, oh, we need left unity, oh, we need left unity, and it's just oh. Now, there are some people that are more focused on the praxis, though, and there are Marxist-Leninist Maoists, as were, and maybe maybe it's just because they're in favor of centralized governance as opposed to decentralized governance. I'm in favor of decentralized governance because it doesn't create as many fail-safes as were. But some and so there might be, and there'll be those political discussions as where it's possibly sectarian wars if a revolution. Because anarchists do have there's a lot of baggage in history that anarchy has against authoritarian socialists because of how often we've been betrayed by authoritarian socialists as well. Nowadays, it's kind of like maybe something would be easier, and definitely some like Marxist Leninists and Marxist Maoists that do say that like anarchists are comrades, as were, and they'll read some of the same stuff that we read too, and well, they want like a diversity of thought, diversity in action too. So, and right now it's kind of more the focus should be more on practice anyway, make sure people's material conditions are met, and if the majority of people who are doing it happen to be Marxist-Leninists or Marxist-Leninist Maoists, like Black Panthers, as they were Marxist-Leninists and Marxist-Leninist Maoists on most of them, then yeah, hey, whatever works, it works. But yeah, a lot of authoritarian socialists would want to. Yeah, and as well as like the ones suspicious of democracy. These are the Leninists. These are the Leninists that will read state and revolution, as it were. Which, as I read in when I read Marxism and Anarchism by Rudolf Rocker, it said like, okay, Lenin didn't like the results that happened at the Constitutional Congress in Russia after the 1917 revolution. He didn't like the results that happened. The people chose the wrong results. So Lenin didn't like that, dissolved that constitutional thing and created the Vanguard Party, or like put the Vanguard Party in power, and he wrote Statement of the Revolution to like justify that. So it was a retcon. I should read a State of Revolution just to get an idea as to where. So yeah, so David Graeber is not wrong here. I'm saying like those who are suspicious of democracy, and that's why I'm an anarchist. I'm advocate for democracy, as it were, even if everyone just like Joe's the wrong thing, or Joe's the way that I wish they didn't. But anyway, but yeah, these would be the kind of people to say the broadest possible coalitions. Though, my God, do I feel that? Continue on. Those who do like democracy but feel a group is taking the wrong strategic decision often find it more effective to challenge its decision-making process than to challenge the actual decisions. A friend of mine said this. This is why, as anarchists, you're allowed to only have one Trotskyist friend. Only one Trotskyist friend. If an anarchist is able to have like two Trotskyist friends and manage to get along with both of them despite that, that's something. I never actually. You know, I know someone that actually is a partner is a Marxist-Lenin Maoist. Well, he is a libertarian-socialist. So I wonder how that relationship is going on, because like I have like said to myself, I'm not being friends with conservatives. That's you can kind of see too if you're watching the chat. I just banned those like two like conservatives out of my chat. It's just like you're not here to learn. You're not here to be open-minded. You're just here wanting to like sound your opinions. That's where there's something. To be fair, they kind of like to say this much. It's like, hey, I'm of different opinions than you, but I'm going to be here to be open-minded. And said, oh, and I watch Trump TV. Well, fuck you. Get out. You can stay and watch, but I'm not going to like let you just like post links to PragerU in my chat. I was like, news like, what was linked there? Oh, that was linked there. Nice. But also to those who are watching as my timer chat are reminded, yeah, my friend Phoenix and my friend Johanna, I really could use the money. So you have extra money, please do. Okay, so back to the essay. There's another factor here that is like less remarked, but I think equally important. Everyone knows that faced with a broad and potentially revolutionary coalition, any government first move would be trying to split it up, making concessions to placate the moderates while selectively criminalizing the radicals. This is the art of governance 101. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. I think we all saw that during the uprising in 2022. Continuing on, the U.S. government, though, is in the possession of a global empire constantly mobilized for war, and this gives it another option that most governments do not. Those thus running it can pretty much any time they like decide to ratchet up the level of violence overseas. This has proved a remarkably effective way to diffuse social movements and founded around domestic concerns. It seems no coincidence that civil rights movement was followed by major political concessions and a rapid acceleration of war in Vietnam. The anti-nuclear movement was followed by the abandonment of nuclear power and ramping up the Cold War, with Star Wars programs and a proxy war in Afghanistan and Central America. Yep, iron contrast, as were. Continuing. That the global justice movement was followed by the collapse of Washington Consensus and the War on Terror. As a result, early SDS had to put aside its early emphasis on participatory democracy to become a mere anti-war movement. The anti-nuclear movement morphed into a nuclear freeze movement. The horizontal structures of DAN stands for Direct Action Network, and PGA. Oh, what was PGA? I was reading that in like the Direct Action Iconography. I forgot to look that up. I have to remember that from those VODs. Anyway, continuing. Gave way to top-down mass organizations like Answer and UFPG. I don't know what the Answer and UFPG are, so I thought I looked them up. From the point of view of government military solutions does have its risks. The whole thing can blow up in one's faces, as it did in Vietnam, hence the oppression, at least since the first Gulf War, to design a war that was effectively protest-free. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's always continue on. There's also always a small risk of some miscalculation, which will accidentally trigger a nuclear Armageddon and destroy the planet. But these are risks politicians face with certain unrest appear to have been more willing to take, if only because direct democracy movements generally scare them. While anti-war movements aren't their preferred adversary, states are, after all, ultimately forms of violence. For them, changing the argument to one about violence is talking things back to their home turf, what they really prefer to talk about. Organizations designed in either to wage or to oppose wars will always tend to be more hierarchically organized than those designed with almost anything else in mind. This is certainly what happened in the case of the anti-nuclear movement. While the anti-war mobilizations of the 80s turned far larger numbers than Clamshell or Avalon ever had, it also marked a return to marching along with signs, permitted rallies, and abandoning experiments in new forms of direct democracy. Oh yeah. I think I'm just gonna. Maybe I did have something to comment in here and months and all this stuff, but I think I'm just gonna continue on and read the rest of the essay. Yeah, I'll just remember to pause and give my thoughts about these sort of things. I think it's just I remember reading a lot about this other things that kind of happen. Some which actually straight from David Graeber about this is the sort of things that he's talking about. So I'm continuing on. 2. The global justice movement. I'm assuming our gentle reader is broadly familiar with the actions at Seattle. IMF World Bank blockade 6 months later in Washington at A16 and so on. Oh yeah, that's right. Oh wait, this was at the beginning of Direct Action Iconography by David Graeber, because they're saying that A16 and 2. It was because of it. It was unfortunately which was a kind of an accurate critique of this anti-globalization movement, the global justice movement. Is that hopping around? They're kind of deadheads, as it were, people who tour Grateful Dead tour stops. This anti-globalization movement was kind of in deadheads for these kind of protests, as it were, or just convention hopping, as it were, from one point to another. I forgot which specifically was the Washington one 6 months later, as it were. It was probably some kind of summit, as it were, but David Graeber has journal entries in his book Direct Action Iconography for the summit at Quebec at the Montreal. That's where. So I forgot what specifically 816 is. I have to go back to the Direct Action Iconography to read that. And this essay is really wanted me to go back to read that too. Anyway, continue on. In the U.S., the movement flares up so quickly and dramatically, even the media could not completely dismiss it. It's also quickly started eating itself. Direct transit networks were found in almost every major city in America, while some of these, notably Seattle and LA Dan, were reformers, anti-corporate, and fans of strict non-violence codes. I'll say this: I'm disappointed to hear that about Seattle. I'm honestly not surprised about Los Angeles though. But it's disappointing to hear about that about in Seattle because, but I have to accept that there's a lot of liberals in Seattle anyway. Continuing, most like New York and Chicago, Dan, were overwhelmingly anarchist and anti-capitalist and dedicated to diversity of tactics. Actually, not surprised by Chicago, honestly. Continuing on, other cities, Montreal, Washington D.C., created even more explicitly anarchist anti-capitalist convergence. The anti-corporate dance dissolved almost immediately, but very few lasted more than a couple of years. There were endless bitter debates about nonviolence, about summit hopping, that's what I was describing earlier, about racism and privilege issues, which Dave Graeber did go into in Direct Action Economic. Often is a problem in leftist spaces too. Democrat Socialist America has a big problem with that actually, of racism and white supremacy in DSA, and how DSA is structured. So people have been trying to create some things and change some things in there, and definitely there's some local chapters of DSA can be better than others. But no, there's a lot of white supremacy and racism in DSA too. There's a lot of liberals that also want to just do electoralism, and it's just so long as they just do their thing, that is fine. IWW has some issues with that too, so they're not perfect either. I think the privilege issues would come into it too. But continuing on with the essay about the viability of the network model. Then there was 9/11, followed by a huge increase of the level of repression and resultant? I think of that word as resultant. I don't recognize that word though.
Resultant.
I guess right. Resultant. Occurred or produced as a result or consequence of something. Resultant. That's an interesting one. Okay, so I'll reread the sentence. Then there was 9/11, followed by a huge increase up of the level of repression and resultant paranoia, and the panic flight or almost all our former allies amongst unions and NGOs. I can see how that happened because, if you're bomb throwing anarchists or very radical people, like people who show up and break windows at Starbucks in Seattle and other places, one thing is also, after every major event, this will kind of like something like the 9/11, the United States government in any state would actually use those as a reason to justify the clampdown on resistance or that's going to happen now because of the January 6th insurrection, as were. And anyone who thinks that the big steel or anything like that are still watching me, well, you can watch me if you want, but if you think the election was stolen from Trump in 2020, you're wrong. And you think that that what happened on January 6th was not an insurrectionist, you're wrong. And some of the mainstream media who are confusing those people as anarchists. It's that's not fucking anarchism. They wanted to put in a dictator. Anarchists are anti-dictators. Very much so. But because of the events of January 6th, the federal government and other governments are going to just be much more stricter of and can increase the variance capital, as it were, and be watching more organizations and whispers on social media and other places about trying to prevent a next January 6th, but not you really going to use that on the right wingers or the white supremacists. They're really going to just really use that on the anarchists and the leftists, as it were. They do that already, as it were. Continuing on, by Miami in 2003, it seemed like we've been put to rot, and a paralyzing swept over the movement from which we've only recently started to recover. Excuse me. September 11 was a weird event. Such a catastrophic that it made it almost impossible for us to perceive anything else around it. It is immediate aftermath, and almost all of the structures created in the globalization movement collapsed. But one reason it was so easy for them to collapse was not just that war seemed such as immediate, more pressing concern, but that once again, in most of our immediate objectives, we already unexpectedly won. Myself, I joined NOC Dan around the time of A16. Again, I gotta let go of what A16 is. Maybe I can quickly Google it right now, honestly. That's a restaurant. That didn't help me. Maybe 16 direct action. Covert and direct action or transfer? What? Okay, no, that doesn't help me either. So yeah, I don't know what is A16 though. I have to remember that. I have to go back to my VODs on direct action or open up that book. But I'm not gonna waste time in trying to look up what A16 is. Anyway, continuing on what I said. At the time, then, as a whole, saw itself as a group with two major objectives. One was to help coordinate the North America wing of a vast global movement against neoliberalism, and what was then called the Washington Consensus, to destroy the hegemony of neoliberal ideals, stop all the new big trade agreements, WTO, FTA, and to discredit and eventually destroy organizations like the IMF. The other was to disseminate a very much anarchist-inspired model of direct action, decentralized affinity group structures, a consensus process to replace old-fashioned activist organization styles with their steering committees and ideological squabbles. At the time, we sometimes called it contaminationism? Contaminationism? This is a new word, so maybe even Google won't know what it is. Yeah, it's like, hey, Google's like, I don't know what you're trying to say. Contaminationism. Contaminationism is what I'm going to go with it. Okay. But continuing on. At the time, we sometimes called it contaminationism. The idea that we all people really need it was to be exposed to the experience of direct action, direct democracy, and they would want to start intimidating it all by themselves. There was a general feeling that we weren't trying to build a permanent structure. Dan was just means to the ends. When it had served its purpose, as several founding members explained to me, there would be no further need for it. On the other hand, there was this. On the other hand, these were pretty ambitious goals. So we always assumed that if we attained them, it would probably take at least a decade. As it turned out, it took about a year and a half. I want to actually stop here and actually want to add, I guess something this is I converse a lot with the YouTuber Steve Shives. He's a friend of mine, so then he considers me a friend. We're not close friends. I honestly could have DM'd him when I realized that he was he might have divorced his wife. Because I kind of suspected that happened well before he announced I got a divorce. But he and I do kind of converse a bit, as we're he has to ask ways, I ask him politically challenging questions, and sometimes we respond, sometimes we converse more into the live chat. And what was I about to say? Okay, so he is not a revolutionist. He's a reformist. He's not an anarchist. He thinks anarchism is bullshit. I want to have a sit down one-to-one talk with him about that this war, and he but he wonders of what happens after the revolution. He's concerned about what happens after the revolution, what kind of form of governance we have, what's going to do afterwards, because he kind of sees, okay, if you have a revolution and dismantle the state or take it over, revolution, viva revolution, and burn down the capital, so what then? That's always his concern. I'm kind of now I want to think about it, approach it, or mention it in the other way. Revolution is building new structures, basically making sure that everyone has material needs are met. Everyone has homes, everyone has food, and everyone has all of their needs covered in the hierarchy of needs. Once everyone has that, then we continue doing that. We just don't stop. Basically, the revolution just never ends in the war. I think that's how the Zapatistas sees it. The revolution never ends. Definitely the people of Rojava. I forgot what the other name that I should be using for that. That was more Kurdish as were. They also see the revolution constantly going. To be fair, they're still fighting for their independence as it were. But it's kind of like a. I guess New York Dan should really have to think about what does happen if we finally succeed that we achieve. We gotta think about after the revolution there. I just think continue doing what they're doing and making sure that things are going smoothly as it were. I guess after the revolution then it's worked on fully luxury automated gate-based anarcho-communism. Anyway, continue on. Obviously, we failed to spark a revolution, but one of the reasons we never got to the point of inspiring hundreds of thousands of people to rise up was, again, that we achieved our other goals so quickly. Take the question of organization. While the anti-war coalition still operates as the anti-war coalition always do, as top-down popular front groups, almost every small-scale radical groups that isn't dominated by Marxist sectarianisms of some sort or another, and this includes anything from organizations of Syrian immigrants in Montreal or community gardens in Detroit, now operate on largely anarchist principles. They may not know it, but containionism works. Alternatively, take the dominant ideas. To watch the consistent landlines and improvements, so much so that it's hard to to remember what public discourse in this country it was even before Seattle. Rarely have the media and political classes been so completely ununanimous about anything. That free trade, free markets, and no-holds-barred supercharged capitalism was the only possible directions for human history. The only possible solution for any problem was so completely assumed that anyone who cast doubt on the proposition was treated like literally insane. I disworked the use of the word insane there, but I'll move on. Global justice activists, when they first forced themselves into the attention of CNN or Newsweek, were immediately written off as reactionary lunatics. And again, don't like the word lunatic there, it's a bit ableist, but continuing on. A year or two later, CNN and Newsweek were saying that we won the argument. I will also state here that this is 2007, so this was before the 2008 crash. And this was also before Occupy Wall Street, which David Graeber was kind of there when it kind of started, and was observing that sort of thing too. So I'm actually really curious about David Graeber's thoughts on those things, thoughts on this essay post after 9/11 as it were, and after all that sort of stuff. But I think also, yeah, that's right. There's a book that David Graeber written worked on with the archaeologist David Wingate, and they did a lot of research about a different indigenous people in different societies as it were, and trying to and they figured out that the white savages period were just not a thing as were. All those societies did have complex systems as were about these things, but they were not. And a lot of times, sometimes, and Peter Geiderlow's talked about this in the Washington Power, is that when I kind of asked Joey just hey, come on and talk about how we'll call this thing. I guess I want to ask questions about this because in Peter Geiderlow's Washington Power, a lot of basically European-centric archaeologists or anthropologists and other people assumed that Mendoza indigenous societies had similar top-down hierarchical structures of the chief being the ruler of things. When I have arguments of me as an anarchist, I want to model off our societies off say the societies of indigenous people, they say they still have leaders, they still have chiefs, and it's just well, those leaders are not supreme, or they don't hold all the power, do they? So it's like I'm very curious. It's like they just see that there's a state and government. When I see, it's like not necessarily. And so it's one of those many times where I'm just like we're talking past each other because we think we agree on the same things as we're not. Just a bit off the topic from the conversation of or discussion of this essay, so I'll continue on. I'll take a drink first. Alright, continue on. Usually when I make this point in front of anarchist crowds, someone immediately adjusts, well, sure, the rhetoric has changed, but the politics remain the same. This is true in the manner of speaking. I was about to say, I was wondering, David Graeber says, more change more than say the same. So, continue on. That is to say, it is true that we didn't destroy capitalism, but we, taking the we here as the horizontal direct action oriented the wing of the planetary movement against neoliberalism, didn't arguably deal it at a bigger blow in just 2 years than anyone else since, say, the Russian Revolution. Let me take this point by point. Free trade agreements! It was an old cap, so that's why I said it like that. All the ambitious free trade treaties planned since 1998 have failed. The MAI was rooted. The FTAA focused on the actions in Quebec City and Miami. Key point here, actually, no. So, was mentioned about Montreal. It's not, no, it was the Quebec City summit of the FTAA. That's the one that, David Graeber participated in the direct action outside of that summit, as it were. And his journal in direct action and iconography is coming from that. So continuing on, stopped it dead in his tracks. So again, I'll reread that part. The FTAA focus of the actions in Quebec City and Miami stopped dead in its tracks. Most of it remembers the 2003 FTA summit mainly for introducing the Miami model of extreme police repression, even against obviously non-violent civil resistance. It was that. But we forgot that this was more than anything the enraged failings of a pact of extremely sore losers. Miami was the meeting where the FTA were definitely killed. Now, no one is even talking about broad, ambitious treaties on the scale. The United States is reduced to pushing for minor country-to-country trade pacts with traditional allies like South Korea and Peru, or at best deals like CAFTA, uniting its remaining client states in Central America. And it's not even clear it will manage to pull that off. The World Trade Organization! Ah, yes, the WTO. Yes, continuing on. After the catastrophe for them in Seattle, organizers moved their next target to the Persian Gulf island of Doha, apparently deciding they would rather run the risk of being blown up by Osama bin Laden than having to face another damn blockade. Wow! There we go. Finally got that burp. Again, sometimes when I'm doing these streams of me reading something like that, I just burp uncomfortably or the wrong time. It's just am I gonna burp? Am I gonna burp out? Am I gonna burp? No, I'm not gonna burp. Okay, now I burp. Yeah, so it's kind of they much rather work with the enemy that they know, Osama bin Laden, than the enemy they don't know, the damn blockade. Very interesting. Continuing on. For 6 years, they hammered away at the Doha round. The problem was that, emboldened by the protest movements, southern governments began insisting that they were no longer agreed to open their borders to agricultural imports from rich countries unless those rich countries at least stopped pouring billions of dollars of subsidies at their own farmers, thus ensuring southern farmers couldn't possibly compete. Since the United States in particular had no intentions of itself making any sort of sacrifices it demanded of the rest of the world, all deals were off. The United States were being such conservative assholes in this section because conservatives, generally speaking, are in fact hypocrites, but their actions always are led to the principles of whatever is good for me. In the United States and free trade, that's what they are. It's also when dealing with treaties too. As an ambitious person, yes, it's often dealing with treaties as well. because the United States wants everyone else to make sacrifices for their benefit, and then making use and extraction their resources, as it were, as opposed to them actually compromising and reaching a deal with others. No, the others have to make sacrifices, not the United States. Much like the ponies in My Little Pony Friendship and Magic. The ponies always got the good end of the deal in there. It was the others, the other groups of people, who were always just like aliens in Star Trek Next Generation. It's just like this one group of people, not ponies, were all have one stereotype. As like the Yaks and Yak accents are like Yak Smash, as it were. The Diamond Dogs were just like very greedy, as it were, and mean, as it were, and have to work with the ponies. But the ponies get they extract the resources, the minerals, and diamonds. All the dragons are just like mean and terrible, and are just a one character type, one personality type, and the ponies are superior to them. The United States subjectivity right there in the free trade agreements, as it were. Continuing on. In July 2006, Pierre Lamont, head of the WTO, declared the dual round dead, and at this point, no one's even talking about another WTO negotiation for at least 2 years, at which point the organization might very possibly not exist. I think the WTO at this time has just end up. No one talks about the WTO anymore. It's like 2021. Current year argument, or the 2021. Yeah, the WTO is not a thing anymore. And that was largely because of the actions of Seattle. Continue on. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank. Fuck the IMF. Fuck the World Bank. This is the most amazing story of all. The IMF is rapidly approaching bankruptcy, and is a direct result of the worldwide mobilization against them. To put the matter bluntly, we destroyed it. The World Bank is not doing all that much better, but by the time the fall effects were felt, we weren't even paying attention. Okay, I think I want to bring up, I wonder how true this is that the IMF and the World Bank are dissolved and not a threat or not a problem anymore. Because I still hear the World Bank and the IMF come up in other discourses, especially around third world debt or the global south, or basically the non-colonized or the colonized countries, as it were. Countries that are not predominantly white people, as it were. The countries are not Australia, New Zealand, North America, or United States, Canada, and Europe, and Western Europe, I should say. Okay. Yes. Continue. This last story is worth telling in some detail, so let's leave the indented section here for a moment and continue in the main text. The IMF was always the arch-villain to struggle. It was the most powerful, most arrogant, most pitiless instrument through which neoliberal policies have, and for the last 25 years, been imposed on the poorer countries of the global south. Basically, by manipulating debt in exchange for emergency refinancing, the IMF would demand structural adjustment programs that force major cuts in health, education, price support on food, and endless privatization schemes that allowed foreign capitalists to buy up local resources at file-sale prices. Structural adjustments never somehow worked to get countries back on their feet economically, but just meant that they remained in crisis, and the solution was to insist on yet another round of structural adjustments. The IMF had another less celebrated role of global enforcer. It was their job to ensure that no country, no matter how poor, could never be allowed to default on loans to Western bankers, no matter how foolish. Even if the banker were to offer a corrupt dictator $1 billion loan, that dictator placed it directly in his Swiss bank account and fled the country, the IMF would ensure billions of dollars, plus generous interest, would have to be extracted from its former victims. If a country decided to default for any reason, the IMF could impose a credit boycott whose economic effects were roughly comparable to that of a nuclear bomb. Oh, this flies in the face of even elementary economic theory, whereby those lending money are supposed to be accepting a certain degree of risk. But in the world of international politics, economic law is only held to the binding on the poor. This role was their downfall. I'm going to pause here because it was actually, that's kind of like activism that David Graeber mentions as we're fighting against the IMF and the anti-globalization movement, is that's kind of started his journey of researching the history of debt. Because it's like at a cocktail party where he met another activist who like was also did a lot of great work as work, and Dave Graeber, the host of the party, thinks that like this Dave Graeber and this activist would get along quite well because they're both activists. And when Dave Graeber mentioned of just like asking the IMF and the World Bank just like forgive the debts of the poor countries, Dave Graeber points out this whole thing as we're in his book, The Debt the First 1,000 Years, is that like, wait a minute, no. Do you expect to like be able to give out a loan to like someone and be always guaranteed to pay it back? Because then like this activist who like for some reason had the visceral reaction or just like a interesting reaction to like, what, you're saying that those poor countries' debt should be forgiven? Because he said, well, everyone has to repay their debts. A poor country that had these loans imposed on them by like dictators or warlords that front the country, take all that loan and put it in a Swiss bank account, but yet the IMF is forcing the poor countries to pay it back. Everyone has to like repay their debts, and that's sort of Dave Graeber's journey to research that and to find out that whole argument like, but one must repay their debts. It's just a moral argument. It's nothing else. It's just a moral argument, not a practical argument, not a financial argument. Just a moral argument. The only reason they do that is because of like some form of morality that you have in your mind. And which is an interesting, fascinating question. Researchers pretend why David Graeber researched debt in this book. Excellent book. Everyone, please go and read Debt the First 1,000 Years. It's an excellent book. And Lynn, hello, Lynn, welcome on in. One of the things that really changed me, but I still don't think I have like fully internalized it. How you doing, Lynn? Give you a you can give yourself a shout out. I will just tell you this one. I had some interesting people who joined the chat, as it were. I was about to give you a shout out, so like, wait, I had to like yeah. And Lynn also like does this kind of like things as it were, where she does like do political discussions as it were. She was reading W.E.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstructionist, which is like a real book I want to read myself and really want to go back and watch those like political talks. I had some people that have like they disagree with me politically, but comes in with an open mind. It's not just ban one because I said I watch Trump TV. Okay, ban. And the other one, I forgot what I banned him for, but it's just like, okay, I don't think you're going to be listening to me either. The other one hasn't like said much since I told him this is not a debate space. But we'll come on in. But yeah, this the Shocking Victory from 2007. So it's along the same lines of like what I've been reading with like Direct Action and Iconography. I should get back to reading that book. And yeah, here David Graeber is to talk about of how like, hey, we actually kind of succeeded in like bringing down the IMF and the World Bank. So continue on. What happened was that Argentina defaulted and got away with it. Okay, I want to learn more about like Argentina too, just as a whole, but also like not just like the 1976 coup that the United States also backed, because it's one of those many coups that the United States assisted us for. But also what David Graeber has referred to a lot about like the 90s and then 2001 in Argentina. But continuing on. In the 90s, Argentina had been the IMF's star pupil in Latin America. Oh, I can see that. Why? Okay. Continuing on. They had internalized, privatized, and every public facilities except the customer bureau. Then in 2002, the economy crashed. The immediate results we all know. Battles in the street, popular assemblies, the overthrow of the government in 1 month, road blockades, occupied factories, horizontalism, broadly anarchist principles were at the core of political resistance. The political cause was so completely discredited that politicians were obliged to put on wigs and phony mustaches to be able to eat in restaurants without being publicly attacked, without being physically attacked. Yeah, this is something that David Graeber has mentioned, and I think sometimes it has to come to that point. Think it, which is something that we talked about along in SJA Social Justice Alchemy. By the way, even to the viewers that I banned, which you're probably going to be banned if you like this about your Trump TV bullshit on like Social Justice Alchemy. And so like we do Social Justice Alchemy every 2 p.m. and some 2 p.m. Eastern and Sunday, 7 p.m. UTC on Sundays. It's just me and a bunch of anarchists and other leftists as we're just shitting around talking about whatever as we're. But but we mentioned this. Oh man, I went to plug Social Justice Alchemy, but I forgot the point I was going to make that we brought up a Social Justice Alchemy as it were. But I think it's like collapse. And we kind of think that's like there's what's going to happen from now. Moving forward is one of two things. Either massive reform is going to actually be implemented to stave off the collapse, as well. Something like a FDR New Deal, as well. So finally, like Medicare, or finally like a more robust food stamps program that is guaranteed to everyone. I'd like to see that happen, though. Or like Section 8 actually being like effective as we're giving people housing, or all those threes happening, and Medicare for all finally happening. Or just complete utter collapse. And I think Argentina had just like the complete utter collapse, but also I think changed actually even for the people that we put into power. Like we voted the Democrats in power. I wish we had someone better than the Democrats to vote for, but even they should also at least should be afraid in some ways of to go out in public as it were. It's kind of happening in some ways because Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin got at least visited by activists as were. They were not going to physically assault Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, but definitely tell it to the faces of what their concerns were, of how, like, listen, you are blocking progress happen. We voted for you to bring progress, and you're not doing that. You're not living up to the promises were. So you gotta like do something, like end the filibuster, or we're gonna vote you out. Joe Manchin at least agreed to like, converse with like the activists that like actually swam up to his yacht from their canoes when he was on vacation and conversed with them. Didn't agree with them, and it's not going to listen to them, but still something. But that's something that like I think we even liberals have to be able to do, is that like they have to like do that too. The politicians have to be like afraid of going out to eat at restaurants unless be at least be afraid of being confronted by like his constituents. Mitch McConnell did get confronted when he went to a Mexican restaurant, which was also salt in the wound. And when the kids in concentration camps with the zero tolerance policy was implemented by Trump's administration, Jeff Sessions. That was the worst instance of it, of like babies being ripped off from like feeding moms to the express, as happened at the border separation of families. But we're still, the border situation is still happening right now. We just deported a whole bunch of Haitians from the border that were trying to get in the country. The whipping from that border officer. Yes, it was whipping. I don't care if he uses like reins or something like that. Why the hell would we have that as a discussion? But we still have those incidents now. As I was saying, with like in Argentina in 2002, the politicians had to hide their faces in order to go out in public too. I think politicians should be confronted when they go out in public when they're not living up to their promises of like making progress. All Democrats, I think, should be confronted by their constituents when they go out. Honestly, if they're not living up to their promises, or there's still problems that happen right now. So continuing on, that was finally my point. But continuing on. When Nestor Kirchner, a moderate social democrat, took power in 2003, he knew he had to like do something dramatic in order to get most of the population even to accept even the idea of having the government, let alone his own. So he did. In fact, one thing no one in position ever is supposed to do. He defaulted on Argentina's foreign debt. Wow. Actually, Kuznets was quite clever about it. He did not default on his IMF loans. He defaulted on Argentina's private debt, announcing that for all outstanding loans, he would only pay 25 cents on the dollar. Citibank and Chase, of course, went to the IMF, their accustomed enforcer, to demand punishment. But for the first time in its history, the IMF balked. First of all, with Argentina's economy already in ruins, even the economic equivalent of a nuclear bomb would do little more than make the rubbles bounce. I shouldn't laugh at that. It's terrible what happened to Argentina in 2002. Second of all, continuing on. Second of all, just about everyone was aware it was the IMF's disastrous device that set the stage for the Argentina's crash in the first place. Third, and most decisively, this was at the very highest of the impact of the global justice movement. The IMF was already the most hated institution on the planet, and willfully destroying what little remained of Argentina's middle class would have been pushing in things just a little bit too far. Oh, must protect the middle class. The middle class, the only class that the politicians in America or in the United States of America, because it's more than just the United States, it's America. People in Argentina might probably consider themselves Americans. I know that Hondurans do consider themselves Americans because they're from South America, from Latin America. Brazilians consider themselves Americans because they're from Latin America, from South America. Anyway. But yeah, it's just the politicians of the USA, they are the only ones that talk. That middle class is the only class that's considered actually enters in the conversation. No, nothing but the worker class, except for maybe someone like Bernie Sanders or AOC. And maybe something about the rich class from someone like Elizabeth Warren, but most of the times they only talk about the middle class. Oh my God, shrinking middle class. Oh my God, that's a big problem. Well, the Reagan reforms caused that. The Reagan deregulations was caused that. But continue on with the essay. So Argentina wasn't allowed to get away with it. Go and take a drink. Alright, continue on. After that, everything changed. Brazil and Argentina together arranged to pay back their outstanding debts to the United States itself, with a little help from Chavez. So did the rest of the continent. In 2003, Latin America IMF debt stood at $49 billion. Now it's at 694 million. To put that in perspective, that was a decline of 98.6%. For every $1,000 owed 4 years ago, Latin America now owes $14. Asia followed. China and India now both have no outstanding debts to the IMF and refuse to take out new loans. Yeah, that's good advice. Don't take out new loans with the IMF. No, fuck that. Or the World Bank. No. You're going to take out loans from those two entities that will force you onto structural adjustment programs. Fuck that. It's a war by other means, a war of debt. Continue on. The boycott now includes Korea, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and pretty much every other significant region economy. Also Russia. Excuse me. I am curious of how the results of all this stuff has occurred after the 2008 crash as well, because this was written in 2007, just before that crash, honestly. And of course, David Graeber was there for Occupy, so I wonder if at least the IMF and the World Bank sort of situation, if there's if David Graeber has an update on things. He has talked about the economics of Azure in other essays. I think that maybe I should honestly read his essay on economics, because that does cover the sort of thing that I'm talking about, with the thing about 2008 crash and how that affected things. But continuing on, China has better loans. I see. So, yeah, I mentioned China. China probably has be clear. China has loans from IMF and World Bank that are better, not like the structural adjustment programs, or that China gives out better loans, because this is an important distinction I want to clear up. I'll continue on, though. The fund is reduced to lording over economies of Africa. I knew we forgot something. Continue on. And maybe some parts of the Middle East and from the former Soviet sphere, basically those without oil. Of course. It's kind of weird if, those Middle Eastern countries probably hope that they don't have oil, because if they do have oil, they're going to be invaded by the United States. But if they don't have oil, then like maybe they're also kind of screwed in another way because they have to invent for themselves. But maybe, honestly, like with the if we're seeing of Afghanistan, they'd rather be living on their own. When we're trying to force the nation state onto Afghanistan, actually, Donald Trump's gonna have like observe this sort of thing too. Whenever like not just the United States but other world powers try to enforce the nation states, so that's what you mean. China gives out better loans. That makes sense. I think I have read or heard about something about like the United States loaned a lot of debt to China as well. There's a lot, and I know there's a lot of leftists that idealize China even right now, and I don't understand those leftists. It can be interesting to look at China and see what they're doing and stuff like that, but I'm not going to advocate or defend the Chinese state, as it were. They're still build their class, honestly, in China, so it's kind of weird of how China is like communist, as it were. I said, but I'm an anarchist, so I say China is like state capitalist. There is like the Chinese government, the state of China, that was like, hey, that things and work things out. Okay. Sorry, I got distracted by something. Where was I? Okay, continuing on with the rest of the essay. As a result, its revenues had plummeted by 80% in 4 years. In the irony of all possible ironies, it's increasingly looking like the IMF will go bankrupt if they can't find someone willing to bail them out. Neither is it clear there's anyone particularly wants to. With its reputation as like financial enforcers in tatters, the IMF no longer serves any obvious purpose for even capitalists. Yeah, that's a good point, Lin Wu. China still has cops, exactly. There's been, continue on the essay, there's been a number of proposals at the recent G8 meeting to make up a new mission for the organization. A kind of international bankruptcy court, perhaps, but all end up getting torpedoed for one reason or another. Even if the IMS does survive, is already been reduced to carbon cutout of its former self. World news and current events about like China is still like a thing, as it were, because I don't know what Biden and the other countries are going to like be in lines with each other are going to do, but like just fighting another Cold War, but this time with China, economic Cold War right now of like of China, because it's a point. I should read that article because because interesting thing about like from what I've been heard about the supply chain issues that are happening right now is that like part of the reason for the supply chain issues, and one thing is just capitalism, and one thing is like capitalism is just in time model that's like creates all these like supply chain issues. So just like so it's not just like a Jenga tower. Our capitalist is not just a Jenga tower where one thing's out of place and it all tops down. It's kind of true, but it's also constantly moving. It's like a moving target. It's like a moving Jenga tower, a moving house of cards. So it's also constantly moving and constantly in cycle because that's capitalism. And so then things just like just gets pulled out, as it were, like a big major like tanker, major shipment vessel going through a certain narrow strait gets barged up. Then it will cause a massive slowdown in a lot of things. There's a paper shortage right now. It's also a pandemic. But China is trying to do the right thing and reduces its carbon footprint to it's not like as radically as much as we need to in order to like save out climate change, but it's something better than what the United States are doing, I guess. But in order for China to do that, they have to reduce steel production. So that's part of the reason it's a supply chain issue. Is that there's less steel being produced. Because there's less steel being produced, a lot of things are still made with steel. A lot of production of everything else is slowing down. So that slows down the entire supply chain. We also still have a huge pandemic going on. And so that's part of the reason for supply chain too. It hit China too. Continuing on. The World Bank, in which early took on the roles of good cop, is in somewhat better shape, but emphasis here must be placed on the word somewhat, as in its revenue was only fallen by 60, not 80%. And there are a few actual boycotts. On the other hand, the bank is currently being kept alive largely by the fact India and China are still willing to deal with it, and both sides know that. So it is no longer in much of a position to dictate terms. Excuse me. Obviously, all of this does not mean all the monsters have been slain. In Latin America, neoliberalism might be on the run. But China and India are carrying on devastating reforms, quote, reforms, within their own countries. European social protections are under attack. True in the UK too. And, well, the UK is part of Europe. No, except that they're not no longer in the EU. But anyway. Continuing on, and most of Africa. Despite much hypercritical posturing on the part of the bonuses and rich countries of the world, it's still locked in debt, and now only facing a new colonization by China. Yep. Today is still true. China is still trying to exert its economic strength over everyone else. So, yeah, that's still a thing. Continuing on. The U.S., its economic power retreating in most of the world, is frantically trying to redouble its grip over Mexico and Central America. We're not living in utopia, but we already knew that. The question is why we never notice our victories. Oliver De Marcus, a PGA activist in Switzerland, points to one reason. And I forgot what the PGA stands for. It's definitely not a professional golf association, that's for sure. That's in a different context, so that's what PGA means. Continue on. Whenever some element of the capitalist system takes a hint, whether it's the nuclear industry or the IMF, some leftist journals will start explaining to us that really this is all part of their plan, or maybe a effect of inexorable working out of the internal contradictions of capital, but certainly nothing for which we ourselves are in any way responsible. Even most important, perhaps, is our reluctance to even say the word we. The Argentina default wasn't that really engineered by Nicholas Kirchhoff. All right, that was the question, so I'll reread it with the question mark essentially. The Argentine default wasn't that really engineered by Nicholas Kirchhoff? What does he have to do with the globalization movement? I mean, it's not as if his hands were forced by thousands of citizens were rising up, smashing banks, and replacing the government with popular assemblies coordinated by the IMF. Or, well, okay, maybe it was. Well, in that case, those citizens were people of color in the global South. How can we take credit for their actions? And that's "we" with the quotation marks around it. Continue on. Never mind that they were mostly saw themselves as part of the same global justice movement as us, exposed similar ideas, wore similar clothes, used similar tactics, in many cases even belonged to the same confederacies or organizations. Saying, quote, "we" here would imply the primordial sin of speaking for others. Myself, I think it's reasonable for a global movement to consider its accomplishments in global terms. These are not inconsiderable. Yet, just as with the anti-nuclear movement, they were almost all focused on the medium term. Let me map out a similar hierarchy of goals. Short term, blockades to shut down particular summit meetings, IMF, WTO, G8, etc. 2. Medium-term goals: destroy the Washington Consensus around the religion, block all new trade pacts, delegitimize and ultimately shut down institutions like the WTO, IMF, and World Bank, and disseminate new models of direct democracy. 3. Long-term goals, at least for the more radical elements: smash the state and destroy capitalism. Yes, destroy capitalism and smash the state. Continuing on. Here again, we found a similar pattern. After the miracle of Seattle, short-term tactical goals were rarely achieved. But this was mainly because we faced with like such a movement, governments tend to dig in their heels and make it a matter of principle that they like shouldn't be. This was usually considered much more important, in fact, than the success of the summit in question. Most activists do not seem to be aware that in a lot of cases, the 2001 and 2002 IMF and World Bank meetings, for example, police ended up enforcing security arrangements so elaborate that they came very close to shutting down the meetings themselves, ensuring that many events were cancelled. The ceremonies were ruined, and nobody really had a chance to talk to each other. But the point was not whether trade officials got to meet or not. The point was that like the protesters could not be seen to win. Here too, the medium-term goals were achieved so quickly that it was actually made the long-term goals more difficult. NGOs, labor unions, authoritarian Marxists, and similar allies jumped ship almost immediately. Strategic debates ensured that they were carried out, as always, indirectly as arguments about race privilege tactics, almost as anything but actual strategic debates. Here too, everything was made indefinitely more difficult by the state's reluctance to war. It is hard, as I mentioned, for anarchists to take more direct responsibility for the inevitable end of war in Iraq, or even to the very bloody nose the empire has always acquired it there. But a case could well be made for indirect responsibilities. Since the 60s, the catastrophe of Vietnam, the U.S. government has not abandoned its policies of answering any threats of democratic mass mobilization by a return to war, but it has to be more careful. Essentially, they have to design wars to be protest-free. There is very good reasons to believe that the First Gulf War was explicitly designed with this in mind. The approach taken to the invasion of Iraq, the insistence on the smaller, high-tech army, the extreme reliance on indiscriminate firepower, even against civilians, to protect against any Vietnam-like levels of American casualties, appears to have been deployed. Again, more with a mind to heading out off any potential peace movement at home than one focused on military effectiveness. This, anyway, would help to explain why the most powerful army in the world has ended up being tied down and even defeated by an almost unimaginable ragtag group of guerrillas with negligible access to outside safe areas, fundings, or military support. As in the trade summit, they are so obsessed with ensuring forces of the civil resistance cannot be seen to win the battle at home that they would prefer to lose the actual war. I want to actually add in what David Graeber is saying about and how war's still going on, but they did make it protest proof by having it to be the more strategic high-tech war of drone strikes. Oh my god, they've George W. Bush loved his drone strikes, Obama loved his drone strikes, but Trump also loved his drone strikes too, and the bombings as it were. And Biden bombed Syria too. How many months? 4 months or 3 months into his presidency? So the high-tech wars is still going on. And that's still a problem. I noticed the notification in Discord. Okay. Continuing on. Before I continue on, it's to make wars protest free, like the war on terror, as it were, they can ensure it so that, don't worry, it's only limited military interactions, as it were, and just bombing at certain targets, as it were. Extrajudicially killing people without a trial, or even people determining the people are the actual people they want to kill, just have to be suspected of terrorist activities, and they'll strike them. Terrible. Anyway, now continuing on with the essay. Perspectives, with a brief return to 30s Spain. How then to cope with the perils of victory? I can't claim to have any simple answers. Really, I wrote this essay more to start the conversation, to put the problem on the table, to inspire strategic debate. Still, some implications are pretty obvious. The next time we plan a major action campaign, I think we should do well to at least take into account the possibilities that we might attain our mid-range strategic goals very quickly, and that when that happens, many of our allies will fall away. We, going to pause right here that people did notice that actually happened. Robert Evans pointed this out in his like podcast series, Portland and Uprising, a roadmap, as it were, that like when the federal agents, like agents from the Customs Borders Protection Agency, were picking up people off the streets of like Portland and putting into like unmarked vans and taking them away, as it were. The liberals came out in force to also protest that in Portland. The mom shield, as it were. Some of those, like, again, white suburbanite moms were also being arrested by the police, as it were. And that was kind of like a horrible what happened. But after, well, there was called in this podcast series, Portland and Uprising, the Fed Wars was over. And the finally some like legislation was passed, some action was taken, so that finally, okay, no. The feds were not picking up people off the streets, as it were. Once the Fed Wars were over, all the liberals went away. The liberals went away, and the people who were out and protesting in Portland and during the Fed Wars were about like in the thousands, went back to the usual just like small hundreds or 300s were. And those were the people that were out every night in Portland protesting, as it were, in the wake of the George Floyd killing. And so that was like covered in the podcast series by Robert Evans. Robert Evans worked on that series and was like a part of it, but he wasn't the main guy. But he helped organize it and the Portland Uprising. But yeah, it's kind of like if liberals are on board with you and your movement and like what your goals are and something like that. Oh, liberals will go away once like that major goal happens, as it were. And so trying to get them back is going to be taken. Linmu said in the chat, I think liberal is just like a mask of benevolence. Yeah, I agree. I can see what I'm saying. We have to recognize strategic debates for what they are, even when they seem to be about something else. Take one famous example. Arguments about property damage after Seattle. Most of these, I think, were arguments about capitalism. Those who decried window brains did so mainly because they wished to appeal to middle-class consumers to move towards global exchange-style green consumerism to ally with labor bureaucracies and social democratic abroad. Yes, this was mentioned earlier about like these kind of like debates where it's like they're really about capitalism, and the anti-capitalists like me want to have those debates. The liberals do not want to have those debates because the liberals do not want to like be seen as a bad guy by saying, no, I think capitalism's fine. We just gotta like maintain it or just like regulate it. Some liberals do actually outright say that, and I'll still debate those liberals. But that's this kind of thing. It's just like liberals kind of hate and have to do the debate because Lin Wu, our friend Nekonomicon. I'm going to shout out Nekonomicon. Why not? Even though some terrible people who's been or some interesting people who's been in my chat. But like Nekonomicon has like fundamentally said, when I was kind of like for fun asking her a question when she had to do the uwu speak. Should we dismantle the state? Should we take over the state and then bring about socialism, or dismantle the state first and then dismantle capitalism? She believes that the state is too powerful; you cannot destroy it. Oh, ye a little faith. But if people just honestly do believe that, they don't want to have the conversations about like dismantling the state as it were. Or like dismantling taxes. Yeah, that's a good point, Linbu. I care more about like the unhoused peoples in those tents more than like Starbucks windows. And yes, Seattle definitely has that problem. I mean, I was like, okay, so I sometimes bus in a commuter bus into Seattle, as it were, and one of the stops when I get off the commuter bus is like actually right south of the courthouse in Seattle. And across that street, as it were, near Pioneer Square, is like a big Seattle park there. Which usually is like, it usually does actually is open to everyone so people can walk in and enjoy that park area, as it were. And a lot of unhoused people do hang out there. Just a little place that they can hang out. It's now fenced off. Just the park is empty and fences are up. And I wonder why that is. I'm sure they'll say it's like because of COVID. But anyway, continue on. This was not part of... this was not a path designed to create a direct confrontation with capitalism, and more of those who argue us as to take this route were at least skeptical about the possibilities that capitalism could ever be really defeated at all. Those who did break windows didn't care if they were offending suburban homeowners because they didn't see them as a potential element in the revolutionary anti-capitalist coalition. They were trying, in effect, to hijack the media to send a message that the system was vulnerable, hoping to inspire similar insurrectionist acts on the part of those who might consider entering a genuinely revolutionary alliance. Alienated teenagers, the oppressed people of color, rank-and-file laborers, impatient with union bureaucrats, the homeless, the criminals, the radically disconnected. If a militant, yeah, and then they fence off the parks. Continue on. If a militant anti-capitalist movement was to begin in America, it would have started with people like this. People do not need to be convinced that the system is rotten, only that there is something they can do about it. At any rate, even if it were possible to have an anti-capitalist revolution without gun battles in the streets, which most of us are hoping it is, since, let's face it, if we come up against the U.S. Army, we will lose. There's no possibility way we could have an anti-capitalist revolution while at the same time scrupulously respect property rights. Absolutely, David Graeber. Absolutely, we can't respect property rights and have a revolution. Absolutely. But I do want a comment on the window breaking anarchists, which unfortunately, anarchists right now still kind of have the reputation of being window breakers, as were, and it's going to be hard to shake that image, as I mentioned earlier in the stream, because for some of those anarchists, that's their own practice, breaking windows, as were, as opposed to feeding their own house people or finding places for their own house people to hold. There are plenty of anarchists and other leftists and socialists that do that kind of practice too, actually addressing people's material needs. But the window breaking anarchists thinking that this is to inspire more people to rise up and join into the anti-capitalist coalition, as it were. This sounds similar to the propaganda of the deed that early anarchists like Miguel Bakunin talked about, and believed that that would be the way for the working class to see that with the breaking windows, that the state is vulnerable and that we can actually overthrow the state as well. There is some merit to why they thought that the propaganda deed could have worked, because if you try to actually assemble a reading group, you'd be able to read some literature of anti-state and anti-capitalist literature at the time in the 1870s, as were, you would get arrested en masse. So there was actual legitimate things. Lin Wu, I am an anarchist who use Linux Kappa. Exactly. But yet so it's not to say that we shouldn't break windows because the liberals will not like us and will decry us because we are breaking windows, as we're, because I think those liberals will never be on our side anyway. They want to, like I said earlier, they'll fall away when the Fed wars were over in Portland, and they fall away when the WTO is over in Seattle. Or when most organizations do achieve their mid-term goals. Or the liberals will go away back to their homes and apartments, and so on, because they again, they don't want to have the debates about capitalism with anti-capitalists, as well, because they don't want to be the bad guys and say, I'm actually for property rights, I'm actually for capitalism, as well. Excuse me. So, but there's but isn't when we point out, a much better use of practice would be to actually help out people meet their material needs, not just point out how bad Starbucks is. Continuing on, the later actually leads to an interesting question: what does it mean to win? Not just our middle-term goals, but our long-term goals. At the moment, no one is even clear how that would come about, for the very reason that none of us have much faith remaining in the revolution in the old 19th or 20th century sense of the term. Yeah, like the Russian Revolution or the Spanish anarchist revolution, as it were. Even though I do like admire the Spanish anarchists from between 1936 and 1939, they were crushed. They had the cards stacked against them, and they thought they were going to get help from the state socialists, as it were. But like the state socialists, abandoned them and betrayed them, as it were. Which is why anarchists have some hold grudges against Marxist-Leninists for just that history, as it were. But yeah, it's is unfortunately John Brockman mentions on Social Justice Alchemy that like if we try to do like a 19th century and 20th century kind of type of revolution and that sort of thing, we're just going to be crushed by the American military, as David Graeber points out in this essay, or that'll be a form of economical collapse, or it's just societal collapse, which is just going to be the one of two things that are going to happen with this system as it currently is. Either we're going to, like I said earlier, we're going to either get massive reform like Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, or we're just going to have an economic collapse. But the thing is that the economic collapse happened like a bunch of anarchists trying to attempt a 19th century and 20th century revolution, and that it's going to be the right wingers and the white supremacists that already have a lot of guns. They're the ones going to take over. They're just going to be able to run things, and well, they do dream about doing this, be able to shoot leftists. We kind of done that actually during the uprisings too. Continuing on. Well, some of those white supremacists are also cops, and so they were able to beat up leftists as well. Continuing on. After all, the total view of revolution that there was a single mass insurrection or general strike, then all walls will come tumbling down, is entirely a premise on the old fantasy of capturing the state. Goes back to the arguments between anarchists and Marxist-Leninists and authoritarian socialists about the authoritarian socialists want to capture the state and become the state themselves, and they'll bring about revolution, being about socialists and communists, and from that. And they believe the state will just wither away. Yeah, I haven't seen that happen. Well, the anarchists want to dismantle the state too, and then dismantle capitalism afterwards. Because many, I have comrades that I agree with them as were, because if the state's still around, we will not dismantle capitalism. And that's a good point, Linwood. At least Trump didn't nuke Portland. Yeah. I'll continue on with the essay. That's the only way victory could possibly be absolute and complete, at least if we're speaking of a country as a whole, or meaningful territories. In a way of illustration, consider this. What would it actually have meant for the Spanish anarchists to have actually won in 1937? Amazingly how rarely we ask ourselves such questions. Just imagine it would have been something like the Russian Revolution, which began in a similar way with the melting away of the old army and the spontaneous creation of the working Soviets, but that was in the major cities. The Russian Revolution was followed by years of civil war in which the Red Army gradually imposed new state control on every part of the old Russian Empire, whether the communities in question wanted it or not. Let us imagine that anarchist militias in Spain had routed the fascist army, which then completely dissolved and kicked the Soviet Republicans government out of offices in Barcelona and Madrid. That would certainly have been victories by anybody's standards. But what would happen next? Would they have established Spain as a non-republic or a anti-state existing within the exact same international borders? Would they have imposed a regime of popular consuls in every single village and municipalities in the territory of what had formerly been Spain? How exactly? We have to bear in mind here that there were many villages, towns, and even regions of Spain where anarchists were almost non-existent, and some just about the entire population was made up of conservative Catholics or monarchists. In other ways, say, the Basque country. There was a militant and well-organized working class, but one that was overwhelmingly socialist or communist. Even at the height of the revolutionary fervor, most of these would stay true to their old values and ideas. If victorious FAA attempted to exterminate them all, a task would have required killing millions of people, or chase them out of the country, or forcibly relocate them into anarchist communities, or send them off to re-education camps. I'll stop here. Oh my god, liberals are so afraid of re-education camps. When I talk about about trying to do my agitprop and trying to get people to change their minds, honestly, they'll say, I don't want to, the liberals will say, I don't want to go to re-education camps. They have that fear that they're going to be asked to go to re-education camps if, like, the anarchists impose their will onto the whole society, though. But that is the question that we anarchists have to ask. I just hope I can convince people to become anarchists too, or agree to, like, at least not obstruct or not impose their own will onto others, or impose things on them. I want to, like, at least hopefully try to convince more people that it's like, so long as we work together but not impose anything on each other, but be done with consensus basis and with, like, direct democracy, I think it worked out. I think a lot of liberals might also, like, see things, once they see things are working fine, they'll still think that it's their state. They'll still think that it's a government, as it were, but they just won't realize it's an anarchist form of government until it's, like, pointed out to them. I guess, at least that's my hope. I'll continue on with the essay. They would not only have them be guilty of world-class atrocities, they would have to give up on being anarchists. Democratic organizations simply cannot commit atrocities on that systematic scale. For that, you need communist or fascist-style top-down organizations. Since you can't actually get thousands of human beings to systematically massacre helpless women and children and old people, destroy communities, or chase families from their ancestral homes unless they can at least say that they were only following orders. They appear to have to be only two possible solutions to their problems. Then does say in chat, will the liberals say being taught actual history of the United States is re-education camps? Ooh, the liberals might not. The conservatives will. The conservatives are want to ban critical race theory. There's a principal in Texas was fired because, like, he was accused of promoting critical race theory. The first black principal of that school too. And yet, critical race theory is a collegiate course. It's a collegiate academic study. It's taught at colleges. It's only a decade old too. It's not something that is, like, taught in elementary school, middle school, or high school. It'd be awesome if it was taught in my high school, honestly. But my high school never read Howard Zinn either. I did. I took 2 U.S. history. It's one of those required classes, actually, or American governments too. And I took U.S. history. Never once was Howard Zinn ever mentioned in that class. And I went to high school in 2000, between 2000 and 2003. So, but yeah, it's like, I agree with them. I think it's like, how about we taught actual history? No, some liberals might not like it. I mentioned Steve Shives earlier in chat. And one of his Patreon hangouts, someone mentioned about the Founding Fathers. And so I mentioned, the Founding Fathers were all a bunch of, like, rich cishet white guys. And Steve Shives took offense to that. He had a problem with that. He did. I just stated the facts. Someone else, like, said, who was also in that call, said, like, well, Steve's problem with you saying that, like, the Founding Fathers were a bunch of his rich white guys. Someone also pointed out, like, well, how can we really be certain that they're cishet? Because they're rich and white, yes, but, like, cishet can't be no position. Okay, but say that the Founding Fathers were rich white guys. I made it sound like that, like, there hasn't been, like, improvements in society since the 1700s. What improvements? How much have we progressed forward? Oh yeah, some progression has been made since the 1700s. The Trail of Tewas and the stealing more land from the indigenous people and the genocide of indigenous people, that's still ongoing in some parts, in some ways. That did continue. Okay, yes, we finally get rid of slavery, except we didn't because of the 13th Amendment. No more 3/5 agreement, as it were. However, prisoners and felons can vote. And Lynn, I agree with you. If prisoners can't vote, we don't have a democracy, because we don't have full suffrages. We don't have full suffrages of everyone. Continue on. Let the Republic continue as the de facto government and controlled by the socialists. Let them impose government control. No, okay, no, I'm going to go back a little bit. because they're talking, because David Graeber wants us to try to imagine, what if the Spanish anarchists actually won the Spanish Civil War and actually defeated Franco and they also defeated the state socialists in the war? Or how would they like achieve, what would be the next goal after the fact? Which is interesting to like think about. And so talk about like what if like the anarchists committed atrocities and like burning down villages and massacring people, but then he said there appears to have been only two possibilities to two possible solutions to the problems. One, let the Republic continue as de facto government controlled by the socialists. Let them impose government control of the right-wing majority areas and get some kind of deal out of them. They would leave the anarchist majority cities, towns, and villages alone to organize themselves as they wish to, and hope that they kept the deal. This might be considered the good luck option. As in, good luck with that. 2. Declared that everyone was to form their own local popular assemblies and let them decide on their own modes of self-organization. This is also interesting because, like, I have, like, some... Again, I'm this kind of person that wants to have these debates. But there was, like, someone who actually did ask questions of me, as it were, and thinks that, like, anarchism is not that feasible, as it were. He's kind of coming back around. I haven't had that much conversations with him since then, as well. But I love to, like, have these talks with, like, him. But he's a Russian person, and he thinks that there are some things that are more important right now. I can definitely see, from his perspective, being in Russia, that, like, there's still no same-sex equality, as it were. So, homosexuality is still really demonized and criminalized in Russia, as it were. So to him, that's a major problem, and that's going to be his primary focus because he does have a family member, a close family member he cares about, that is gay, and you can't really say that you are gay in Russia, as it were. Because then, okay, I'll give it that, like, that's one thing that America has to prove on. We have same-sex marriages in America. Still a lot of homophobia in America, though. That's still a problem. Then the conservatives lost the battle with gay marriage, and so they're now fighting against like trans rights. But like, okay, so the point of like bringing up this Russian man who I converse with is his questions about anarchists, as it were, anarchism. He always brings up to the point: what if the like next door, or right or over the mountains, or across the other side of the river, or something like that, or over there, another part of the country, another part of the area, as it were, is a fascist cult like uprising? Do the anarchists leave the fascist cult alone to like let the fascist cult like recruit a bunch of harem of people, as it were, harem of women, as it were? And it's just like, this is such a weird thing. It's not. So there is a fear that like if anarchists are defenseless, which I corrected him and said, like, we're not necessarily defenseless. We'll form militias if we need to. But there's the fear of something like that like if there's no government, there's no state, as it were, the way he sees it, then, and from his understanding of like how anarchists defines the state, then the fascist cult's going to come over and take over and just like, hey, this is easy pickings, as it were, and then rule over, and then be like Far Cry 5 all over again. It's like, but I tried to explain to him something like that. Listen, if the fascist cult is actually a threat to like the anarchists, as it were, and they have the means to do so, they'll form militias and try to like at least protect themselves from the fascist cult, or stop the fascist cult from like growing power and gaining in power and influence, as it were. No, the anarchists would stand up and do that. So apparently, I had to like make it clear to them: no, the anarchists will fight fascism. But anyway. Continue on with the essay, because what if the Spanish anarchists were actually successful? The latter seemed the most fitting with the anarchist principles, but the results wouldn't have likely been too much different. After all, if the inhabitants of, say, Bilbao overwhelmingly desired to create a local government, how exactly would one have like stopped them? Municipalities where the church or landlords still command popular support would presumably put the same old right-wing authoritarians in charge. Socialist or communist municipalities would put socialist and communist parties' bureaucrats in charge. Right and left statists would then each form rival confederations that, even though they control only a fraction of the former Spanish territory, which each declared themselves the legitimate government of Spain, foreign governments wouldn't recognize one or the other. And since none would be willing to exchange ambassadors with non-governments like the FAA, even assuming the FAA wished to exchange ambassadors with them, which it wouldn't. In other words, the actual shooting war might end, but the political struggles will continue, and large parts of Spain would presumably end up looking like contemporary Chiapas, which each district or community divided between anarchist and anti-anarchist factions. Yeah, that will definitely happen. I mean, as Dick Graeber points out, it's happening in Chiapas right now. Even though Zapatistas have their own thing and they're continuing on their own thing, probably have to protect themselves in political struggles and ensure that their people have food and housing and sort. Like I said in my point, it's just like Steve Jobs asked what happens after revolution, and my point is like there's no after revolution. A revolution is constant because we're constantly making sure that people have their food, constantly making sure that people have homes, constantly making sure people have their needs met. So we constantly have to be sure that happens. So there's never. It probably is sadly never a time to relax. However, as like Emma Goldman also said, if there's no dancing to revolution, there's no revolution of mind. But I think David Graeber is accurate that like if the Spanish anarchists somehow were successful at the Spanish Civil War, that like they'll still have to continue the political struggles, and definitely the possibility that like these non-government FAI or the non-state FAI would not. How likely would they have an ambassador, and how likely would they deal with the other political powers in the world and stuff like that? Yeah, they probably wouldn't. So that if there is one party, faction, or another that says we are the legitimate government of Spain, the United States, Europe, UK, France, all those other like status nations will probably deal with those people, or try to do with both people. Or ensure also that those are the ones that are actually in power or something like that and crush the FAA. Which, yeah, it's very likely to happen. But continuing on. Ultimate victory would have to be a long, arduous process. The only way to really win over the status enclaves would be to win over their children, which could be accomplished by creating a obviously freer, more pleasurable, more beautiful, secure, relaxing, fulfilling life in status sections. Foreign capitalist powers, on the other hand, even if they did not intervene military, would do everything in their everything possible to head off the notorious threat of a good example by economic boycotts and subversions and pouring resources into status zones. In the end, everything would probably depend on the degrees to which anarchist victories in Spain inspired similar insurrections elsewhere. This is something that third worldlists kind of like believe. They really believe that, like, for North Revolution, the worldwide revolution, I think third worldlists are more kind of like status socialists as well. But they think that, like, the revolution has to happen in the third world countries, in the poor countries outside the United States, in order to succeed. My disagreement there is just like, you know, kind of like answering this example, but in the example of U.S.'s foreign policies and activities all around the world, like in the Middle East and Africa and in Southeast Asia and in Latin America, is that no, the United States will crush those things. If there's any like country that needs to be like socialist or something like that, they'll crush it. Again, threat of a good example. Oh, here's a good example. Even though this is a status socialist society, it's where Cuba. They embargoed Cuba. The United States embargo is still on Cuba. It's like they're kind of at the point now that they both parties know that it's there, so they'll work around it the best they can. And there's problems with Cuba, and I still have my issues with Cuba as a government because I'm an anarchist as well. And maybe there's like problems with, and definitely I don't know if like Fidel Castro should be one to like be idolized by leftists, but the leftists do quote Castro and do think of like Castro says and take this Castro's words, but Castro's an authoritarian, so I don't like Castro for that, and I'm sure he did some horrible things too. Che Guevara, I have to research Che Guevara as well. I don't think he's that big of a monster or that like others like deep in the house, but I'm indifferent on Che Guevara, I'll say that. But like, but yeah, the foreign capitalist powers like going to like basically make sure that like a threat of a good example is never given like seen the light of day, something like that. They would definitely do that. They will definitely post their will on that too. And it looks like, yeah, okay. So this is the funnel. And then Wood said in chat, the rest of the world would be much better off without the United States. I agree, Lin Wu. Yeah, one can make the argument it's like, oh yeah, if the United States gone, there'll still be the UK, there'll still be France, and just like, okay, yes, well, after the United States is gone, they'll work on dismantling all the other like global world powers that do terrible things to the rest of the world, and definitely the United Kingdom and France as one of those like three, and then like any other like imperialist nations and that does like terrible things as well too. Portugal, Spain. Spain is the third, it's kind of like the poor nation of like Europe though, because like they did a lot of imperialism in like the dawn of the New World and the global expansion as it were, or just like everyone else. And in Greenland, the embargo on Cuba needs to end. All embargoes on all countries and all sanctions on all countries need to end. The sanctions against Yemen is like terrible, as it were. It is causing massive amounts of deaths and like famine right now. All because our allies of Saudi Arabia. Continuing on, but this is going to be the finally going to finish off this portion. Finally going to finish off the essay because we got the last paragraph. The real point of the imaginary exercise is just to point out that there is no clean breaks in history. The flip side of the old idea of a clean break, the one moment when the state falls and capitalism is defeated, is that anything short of that is not really a victory at all. If capitalism is left standing, if it begins to like market your once subversive ideas, it shows that capitalists really won. You lost. You've been co-opted. To me, this is absurd. We can say that feminism lost, that is, achieved nothing, just because corporate culture felt obliged to pay lip service to condemning sexism, and capitalist firms began marketing feminist books, movies, and other products. And other products? Of course not. Okay, that was like... I'll read that as a question. Can we say that feminism lost, that achieved nothing just because corporate culture felt obliged to pay lip service to condemning sexism and capitalist firms became marketing feminist books, movies, and the other products? Of course not. Excuse me. Unless you manage to destroy capitalism and patriarchy in all one foul blow, this is one of the clear signs that you have gotten somewhere else. You gotten somewhere. Presumably, any effective road to revolution will involve endless movements of competition, and endless victorious campaigns, endless insurrectionist movements, or movements of flight of unconverted autonomy. I hesitate to even speculate what is meant to really be, what it might be really like. But to start in that direction, the first thing we need to do is recognize that we do, in fact, win some. Actually, recently, we've been winning quite a lot. The question is how to break the cycle of acceleration and despair and come up with strategic victories. With some strategic visions, the more the merrier. And those victories build on each other to create a culminating movement towards a new society. And that is the end of The Shock to Victory by David Graeber, an essay written in 2007. And I think, it's definitely worth having a discussion of what to do. Because even though there's liberal feminism, as it were, as David Graeber pointed out, like capitalist feminism, it's also like rainbow capitalism. We're still critical of like liberal feminism and like rainbow capitalism, as it were, or the liberal feminism of like hire more women guards. So we still fight against those sort of things because, and actually David Graeber pointed out in other places, I probably should it's fine to see if like there's particular essays that like David Graeber wrote about like patriarchy and how it's like tied to capitalism and so on, because those things are tied together as it were. So I'm going to try to find those essays as it were and see this because you need, in order to like fully get rid of patriarchy, you need to get rid of capitalism. So we're going to just like constantly be fighting. It's just like the victories kind of look like victories, but we should like prepare for like what to do afterwards, as it were, and how to continue forward, as it were. But my voice is like very tired, as it were. Not going to end the stream, but I'm going to switch over to like doing something else, playing something else. And so for now, for sure, I'm going to switch over to the Be Right Back screen. Want a 3-minute ad break. And we are also going to like be doing some self-care. It's probably going to be a long break because like I need to like fire up the game and change things over. So thank you for all for listening and watching, and as it were, if you come in, even the people I banned, I think if you still stick it out and watch this whole thing for like 2.5 hours, thank you so much. But I'm still gonna ban you. So we're gonna everyone joining the self-care break, get up and stretch. Top off your drinks. I really need to drink some more. Eat something if you're hungry. Go lay down if you need to. Use facilities if you need to. Don't forget to take your medications if you haven't already. If you're a person that wears a binder is like 6 hours, it's been 8 hours, take it off, give your body a break. Same thing if you're tucked, check your body, make sure you're not hurting yourself. Gonna transfer it over to the Be Right Back screen, gonna switch over and play a game, and I will be right back.